Hello, and welcome to another episode of Musical Talk. I'm Michael Shapiro. Longtime fans of the TV series Doctor Who may remember an episode called The Five Doctors, which teamed up several actors who had played the Doctor, along with imposters and stock footage. The novelty came from the corralling together of individuals normally experienced alone, or in smaller numbers. How would they interact? Would their personalities mesh or clash? And would anyone get in a word edgewise? In a similar spirit, last summer saw a harmonic convergence in the Musical Talk world, where as many as 6 presenters found themselves together in close proximity in London and spent the afternoon in wide-ranging conversation. The colloquium began in Nick Hudson's flat and included Nick himself, Thos Ribbets, Dominic McChesney, Antonia Gentili, and yours truly. And that almost sounded like lyrics for a second. We then moseyed over to the lovely home of Musical Talk's longtime friend Jonathan Cohen, whose encyclopedic knowledge of musical performance practice is dwarfed only by the gravitas of his speaking voice. The afternoon started out something like this.
Hello, welcome to a very, very, very special episode of Musical Talk. My name is Nick Hudson. A world first. I'm joined here by Dom McChesney.
Hello.
That's not a world's first. World's first for me, I'm joined here by Mike Shapiro, who's in the room.
In the room, and it's 1,005 degrees.
It is 1,005 degrees in both Celsius and Fahrenheit. Tonya, hello, lovely lady. How are you? And Thos, hello.
Hello. What's the temperature in Kelvin?
Ask Kelvin, I don't know. So we are going to do a completely improvised episode where we have more musical theatre knowledge in this room than there has ever been. So I think we can just talk about musicals, and I guess...
Controversial.
I know.
Musical Talk summer party.
Yes.
Yeah.
It certainly feels like a summer party. The thing is, I think we just talk about the last show we listened to on our iPods. Do you have an iPod, Thos?
I do indeed have an iPod.
Do you have an iWax cylinder?
The cylinders are harder to come by. Certainly in this weather, the wax would not work. Shall I kick off?
Yes, go.
Yes, well, I don't mind telling you, but actually, as we're recording this, it's the Edinburgh Festival Fringe has only just started, and I've recently been spending the last few weeks trying to work out what I am going to see. And I like to plan it like a military operation, but one of the problems for that is that it also means that there are just some shows you simply cannot slip into your catalogue. And unfortunately, this year my highest profile casualty is the Edinburgh. There's a local Edinburgh Gilbert and Sullivan Society. You knew it was going to start here. Yes.
Took 7 seconds for him to mention Gilbert and Sullivan.
And they are doing HMS Pinafore, which is one of my favourites. And I would have loved to have seen their HMS Pinafore. I saw this group do HMS Pinafore, I think, about 10 years ago, and it was fantastic. Also, they had just one man on a piano playing the score completely. So, as I'm not going to see it in Edinburgh, I thought about 3 days ago, well, I'm going to catch up with HMS Pinafore anyway. So I went back and listened to the D'Oyly Carte version of the 1960s, I think. And that was the last show I listened to in its entirety on a recorded device.
How wonderful.
I think I have those recordings. I have a box set up here.
Do you find that when you start listening to a Gilbert and Sullivan that you then...
Is that EMI or is that Decca, by the way? I'm just being handed an urgent piece of paper.
Have to blow the dust off it first, thus.
Oh, it is the D'Oyly Carte. So, yep, that will be the Deccas. Thank you. Very good. Sorry, Dom, you were saying?
Yeah, I was wondering, when you start listening to one show by Gilbert and Sullivan, does it give you a taste and then you'll go and...
Do some more.
That's
exactly what I find, yeah. The thing about Gilbert and Sullivan, although I talk about it a lot on Musical Talk, I don't spend every second of my life listening to it or thinking about it. It is one of those things I sort of put aside and then come back to really enjoy.
Yes.
I mean, recently, somebody has found, or has put up on YouTube, and I don't know for how long, a 1966 BBC radio recording with Patricia Routledge. Yes, this is in Ruddigore, of course, my other favourite.
Oh.
Patricia Routledge playing Rose Maybud in 1966, and the entire Gilbert and Sullivan recording is there on the radio. None of the other, they did a whole series, but Ruddigore seems to be the only one that's surfaced. See it now, listen to it now, fans.
Slightly
I really ought to stop on GNS because other people will want to talk about slightly more modern things like,
well, I was just actually thinking,
like the Arcadians.
Slightly off topic, but I've got a vinyl record of Patricia Routledge singing Mother, is it Abbess in Sound of Music?
Oh, really?
Yeah, it's a
Really?
vinyl. I found it at a charity shop. Yeah,
What
so
era
read
would you
that.
say that was?
I think it's from the 80s.
Because she also did an old Coward review in the 1970s. called.
She did Cowardly Custard.
She did do Cowardly Custard, and she sang
great
What
title.
Oh, Mrs. Brisket.
And that because during that show, Coward died. Because I had a friend.
It was that
who
bad?
At that performance. Oh, I had a friend who was at the performance when the news came in.
Oh, no.
That Coward had died during the show. He wasn't watching it.
He died in his sleep in Jamaica, didn't he?
Yes. So, and it obviously affected the audience. It was one of those theatrical moments in history. So,
Gosh. I really like Cowardly Custard. I think it's a great score. I was listening to that a few weeks ago. But I really ought to stop hogging this because other people...
No, it's interesting.
Wait, the show is called Cowardly Custard.
Yes.
And is it a review of Noel Coward?
Yes, it's basically... It was a collection of his work right at the end of his life. And funnily enough, there was a parallel one going on in America called Oh, Coward. So there's two... They both wanted to honour sort of Noel Coward, and they both did it almost exactly the same time. But what's wonderful about Cowardly Custard, I don't know Oh Coward enough, but what's wonderful about Cowardly Custard is there is a tendency when people are singing Noel Coward songs to sing like Noel Coward, so everything sounds like this singing typewriter. But of course, actually, they got professional singers and performers to do it, and so for at last... There's recordings of Noel Coward songs by people who have got voices that we would recognise as late 20th century voices rather than... I love Noel Coward, I love everything Noel Coward did, and I love the way he speaks. But it's sad to me that so much of his music is sort of pickled in aspic.
whereas he wrote pop songs, and he wrote right from the times of operetta right forward to up till Sail Away, when he was writing, for want of a better phrase, modern pop rock songs for that.
Well, when you say pop, the most famous pop number that Noel Coward wrote was Mad About the Boy, of course.
Yes.
People don't realise that's a Noel Coward song.
And there's a...
But we realised that at Brief Encounter, didn't we? When I was surprised to hear all these modern-ish sounding songs that one wouldn't associate with Noel Coward.
And then I explained to you that they were Coward numbers.
Yeah. Let's move forward to the 20th century. Tonya.
This is going to be a complete leap, because I was just listening to everybody's talking about Jamie on the way here.
You stole mine.
Snooze you lose, which is like the complete opposite of GNS, because it's a show that came out this year in the West End in February.
And you two have just seen it, haven't you?
I've just seen it, yeah.
In fact, we just recorded a discussion about that same show just about 2 or 3 days ago.
It's interesting to listen to the cast recording coming back after seeing the show. Obviously, I wanted to listen to it through because I didn't listen to the cast recording before I went to the show, which is unusual for me because usually I always listen ahead.
Do you think you should? I mean, as a general round-the-table question, sorry to interrupt, Tonya, but do you think it's good to listen to a cast recording before you see the show? Because that's the thing with Hamilton, is you do have to listen to the cast. You have to, but it really does help.
Oh.
Do you think that's
So it's not as good as all that, then? Is that what you're saying, Nick? Doesn't stand up on its own. That's worth knowing. Thank you.
Well, that's my question. Do you think it's a flaw of the piece if you need, or if you... Matilda, for example, is another example where it would help if you listen.
No, because I sorry, I didn't mean to jump in so much, but I...
Do it, Tom, do it!
When I heard the cast recording of Matilda, I didn't like the show. It was only when you dragged me screaming through the doors that I actually appreciated it, and then I went back, and I've since enjoyed the cast recording. Whereas when I first heard it, I didn't really like it that much at all. But when I could link it with what happened on stage, if it's a show that I'm really looking forward to, then I may buy the cast recording before. But had you heard the cast recording of Jamie before you went?
There's nothing room. Tonya was shaking her head.
I did, because I didn't anticipate having a chance to see it, because I hadn't thought I'd catch it out here. So I did listen to it just to get a sense of what the show is about. And this was a case where listening to the recording, I don't think it hampered the experience, but it wasn't really a substitute for seeing it live. And I think this is generally true, is that the show will contextualize the songs. It'll have spoken dialogue between the songs that gives it meaning. I think cases like Hamilton are the exception rather than the rule. And generally it's best to hear the songs as part of a story.
But do you think it's because they're sung through? Like Les Mis, for example, in order to get an idea of the story, whereas you don't need to listen to Jamie to get an idea of the story, you need to see the show.
Right, I think you're correct. I think the density of spotting of the songs has a big impact on this. So if there's 10 songs in the show, that there's quite a bit of material outside those songs in the show, whereas if the show is represented on the cast album in its entirety or close to that, like Hamilton or Rent, you can probably get away with just listening to the cast album. But I still think you're missing something that way.
Yes.
But I'm not sure there's a right or wrong answer to the actual question, because there are so many shows which are not currently on that actually we've all developed a taste for musical theatre, I imagine, not just from seeing it, but from the albums we've listened to in various forms over our lives.
You certainly experience more musicals from the cast recordings than you will from seeing it.
Absolutely, and that, I know we started with Gilbert and Sullivan, but actually I worked my way through the Gilbert and Sullivan cassettes at my local audio lending library when I was a teenage boy. So that's how I got into Gilbert and Sullivan.
You rebel, Thos.
Well, but that, that's how one did it. And I, like everyone, I then went off and bought other albums. If I'm going to see a show, don't think I'd ever buy an album or listen to the score before I went to see a show if I was going to see it and it was a new show. But I don't think this is why I don't think there's a right or wrong answer to this. I think that sometimes you want the album because you've seen the show and you loved it. Sometimes you see a show and you think, goodness me, this is a pile of old nonsense. I never want to hear, think, or see this ever again.
And another twist on the whole cast recording concept is, Dom, you're probably the best person to answer this, but Tonya as well. Do you ever listen to any? Do you ever learn the songs before you go and see the show? Would you want to sit down with a pianist and go through the songs and think that's to really get under the skin of the song?
Well, not really. I only if I was going to use it for an audition, but I wouldn't use something current anyway. But I certainly learnt, because like Thos, my introduction was via Gilbert and Sullivan, so as a child I learned to sing the Major General song, so
good one to start as a child.
Exactly. I am the very model of a modern Major
I think
General.
that's the way for many performers, because I started off singing GNS as well. I've sung loads of music of musicals I've not seen, because you just do.
GNS or Joseph, isn't it?
Well, if you have a teacher that suggests stuff to you, this would suit you, you tend to learn things. Like, I sang loads of music from Phantom, like 10 years before I even saw it, so you just tend to learn things that people suggest as well.
And did you enjoy? Did it make you appreciate the difficulty of Phantom more, knowing how hard the songs for Christine and Carlotta are?
I guess so.
Yeah.
I don't know really. I don't know.
It's certainly an interesting way to look to.
Yes, I mean, I think that one does, when you're listening to cast albums, you do pick up certain things and then you sing along. But because I haven't experienced this, but I have heard that at productions of Wicked, people are singing along in the audience.
Yes, that's always
I've seen that in Joseph. I've heard someone singing the lyrics during the overture of Joseph, and you think, we haven't even got to the lyrics yet.
The worst I ever did with that was the overture to HMS Pinafore, because when they were playing it, I suddenly went, "Oh, this is the Guinness advert," because I'd never
Goodness me,
seen
man.
HMS Pinafore. So I was going, "A bottle of Guinness Supporters Club" in the audience.
Mike, do you find as a composer and you as a composer as well, we listen to music and I think in a different way to other people. We're listening to what's happening usually beneath the vocals. I know when I saw Mamma Mia, our friend Jonathan Cohen said I wasn't paying attention to film, I was listening to the bass line, I was listening to what the chords are doing, I was listening to the arrangements. Do you find that with cast albums?
I do, but that's a phenomenon that kicks in after a couple of listenings.
Right.
I have disciplined myself on first listening of a cast album and first watching a show to not try to overanalyze, because it's easy to fall down that rabbit hole where you start thinking, what chord progression was that? And, that instrumentation is interesting. And, the show's over. What happened? So
sometimes it's a good thing.
That's true. It can get you through a tough show.
Yeah.
You start listening to the bass line. But in most cases, I try to absorb the show and experience it as an audience member the first time through. And if there's a second time, then I'll be looking at nuance and then paying attention to the music and asking myself which songs I really liked. And then, as is sometimes the case in a cast album, I'll really start listening to the arrangements and the orchestration and counterlines and stuff like that, and deciding what I can steal. So that's the progression for me.
But also, Mamma Mia is not a good example there, because even if you've not seen Mamma Mia 2, you know precisely what music you're going to get. It's a jukebox musical, and therefore we've all got the original ABBA arrangements hardwired into our bonds.
There are some real surprises in that film. There's a beautiful
non-ABBA songs.
No, they are ABBA songs.
Thank you very much. So it's a jukebox musical.
There's a couple that there's a song that Jonathan and I certainly didn't know, which at the end of the film, we're not giving anything away, but it was a real surprise of a song. And they have been rearranged for the film.
Yes. Oh no, I know they've been rearranged. But what I'm saying is, if you already know the material, because ABBA songs are so etched into our consciousness, that actually you could go straight into that musical film and start analysing the arrangements, or what have they done differently here? Because this is different, and you're immediately trying to unpick why. Whereas if you're going to a new show, you wouldn't know what is supposed to be speech marks of a standard arrangement and what would be a non-standard arrangement. As we're talking about arrangements, I'm going to ask a question which I've asked before on Musical Talk, because there's no right or wrong answer. But it is back to the tunic question. We love Sondheim. Everyone loves Sondheim. It is against the law not to love Sondheim. Sorry, Mike. But even if you don't much like Sondheim, you know the feel of a Sondheim. You understand what it sounds like. Can you imagine what it would be like to go and see a Sondheim show that was scored or arranged by someone who wasn't in the style of Jonathan Tunick? If it was done like a Salvation Army band, or all on xylophones, or something absolutely. It doesn't have to be wacky, but wouldn't it be marvellous? Wouldn't it be interesting?
The Pie Shop production of Sweeney Todd was arranged for piano and clarinet,
which is a particular favourite of mine. That combination,
not by Jonathan Tunick, and in a way it helped because it made one appreciate. Going to what Mike was saying, it made one appreciate the real complexity of the music because there wasn't so much to listen to. By that I mean you heard Sondheim's very detailed piano score, and you heard what's called the ossia line, which is the other line that a composer will write, and then the melody line. So you heard purely what Sondheim wrote, and you very rarely get that with any production. And you very rarely get that with any production of Sweeney Todd.
There has been, because there's been Into the Hood, which obviously uses a hip hop bass, but there's also been a black metal version of Sweeney Todd.
And a disco version.
And a disco version. I didn't know about the disco version. That's interesting.
It's a disco version of Sweeney Todd, the opening song. It's quite funkadelic, isn't it, Thos?
I have no idea, but I can't imagine it would be anything other than simply appalling.
Mike, Tonya stole your idea, so do you have any other albums that you've been lugging into your ears?
Yes. My most recent album was, in fact, the Everybody's Talking About Jamie Cast album, but that idea has been plundered. So, probably the second most recent Cast album I listened to is of a very contemporary show that I think is just going off Broadway now, and that is Be More Chill, which is a contemporary musical in a synth pop style about a awkward high school student, surprise, who, and this part is the surprise, who finds a microchip that has a kind of embedded AI that gives him a better personality that allows him to be more confident with women. And it's almost like a Cyrano kind of story, or maybe a Faustian story, because he installs the chip. I forget if he installs it or swallows it, but essentially it lets him have social graces that he didn't and become more popular in school. So it's extremely smart. It's funny and smart, and I'd call it of the Tisch school of lyric writing, where the words fly at you and it's very naturalistic and conversational, but it's also very melodic. I only listened to it once because after listening to it once, I swore I was going to see it, which I'm going to do when I return to New York on this trip. And therefore, I'm trying to let the memory of the Cast album fade away a little bit before I go back to see it in the theatre.
May I ask you a question about the plot? And you may not want to reveal it, but there sounds like two obvious solutions to that. Either there is some kind of deal, which he manages to break, or the arrangement comes to a sad end and therefore it's a tragedy.
That would indeed be spoiling the ending,
Right. Don't give me the answer then, but I will say there's a musical called Flowers for Algernon, which is about someone who's...
Michael Crawford was in it, wasn't he?
Indeed, he was... Algernon's the mouse, isn't he?
Yes.
Anyway, they augment this animal.
Charlie and Algernon, it's called.
That's right.
I've read the book, so...
You read the book?
Yeah.
Isn't it an American... It's a
staple, yeah. We're all forced to read it, and we're in tears by the end of the class.
Was it Charlie Strauss?
He did.
It is, yes.
Is it a Charles Strauss?
Yeah.
Yes. I should know that.
Yes.
Goodness.
I knew something Thos didn't. High five.
My good Lord.
The spirit of the show is very different from Flowers from Algernon in that it's very contemporary. It's in a contemporary high school setting. The humor is of the era, of today. It's not lachrymose. It's not supposed to be profound, but it does smuggle in a few good ideas in the subtext of pop entertainment. I remember being really smart, and I've deliberately not listened to the cast album again because I want to try to approach the show with as fresh a mindset as I can.
I've listened to it twice. It's really, really good.
But if you had not enjoyed the album, would you be wanting to see it?
Not at New York prices. No.
But that's interesting, isn't it? Because we were talking about whether we listen to a show first or not. And I think you've been very brave to listen to the show first, knowing you could see it. But I suppose, it's a taste test, isn't it? I mean, if I'd listened to Gilbert and Sullivan when I was 13 and not liked it, I wouldn't be having this conversation with you now.
I think, and especially in the case where ticket prices can be over $100 easily, or $200 or more.
Is that Fahrenheit or Celsius?
Both at the same time. The cast album can perform the practical function of letting us get a sense of whether or not we want to see the show, which I guess is one of the reasons the cast albums are released. And since I'm less casual about buying tickets today, I think it's and cast albums are effectively free thanks to the streaming music revolution. It's a very effective way to get a sense if you want to see the show at the cost of spoiling some of the show.
Well, this is a good tip, because something I like to do is listen to the first 5 or 6 tracks. And then if I like what I'm hearing, then I save the end till seeing it live.
Do you really?
Yeah.
How do you have that self-will?
I don't know.
It's too busy generally, aren't you?
Generally too busy. I didn't. I did that with Avenue Q because
you only got as far as F.
Oh dear. A friend of mine said, don't listen to the whole thing because of the jokes. You'll know all the jokes when you go, and it's true. The majority of the jokes for the first half I already knew.
I would just stop the advice there. Don't listen to the whole thing.
Yeah, just don't listen to the whole thing.
It's not my favourite show.
It's a show that I really am looking forward to. But like you said, if you think that there's not a chance to see it, because I kind of reserved and bought the cast album for A Gentleman's Guide to Love and Murder before it was released, I believe, and so I was so excited about the prospect of a musical version of Kind Hearts and Coronets.
Quite right.
I was just on edge. So when it came out, I just devoured it. But then I did, after listening to it, I thought, I've got to go and see this. So I just kind of moved heaven and earth as much as I could to actually get to see it. I suppose it works different ways. But then I was sold Wicked, you see, in a shop that no longer exists. Because I went in and I said, what's this Wicked like? Is it any good? And they went, oh yes. And they played Popular to me. And I loved it, so I bought the album and then realised that that's the only song in the whole show that I liked. So.
Here. So, should an album contain dialogue?
Oh, I like to listen to old cast recordings and compare them to newer cast recordings, because the new ones seem to have a lot more dialogue, don't they? They will... sometimes you get double casts album. Ragtime, for example, is a double CD, and Les Mis, I think, is about 8 discs or something, and that's just that one. And I think if the dialogue is integral to the rhythm of the song's opening, that they say the best skill is if you can bleed from dialogue to song properly, then by all means put the dialogue.
As in Les Mis, another bleeding song.
Yeah. Put the dialogue in, if the rhythm from the speaking goes into the singing, then by all means put it into the album. But if not, I don't think it's really necessary.
I think vintage has got something to do with this as well, though, if you don't mind me saying. And once again, Gilbert and Sullivan, I know we keep talking about it, but actually Gilbert and Sullivan
put a penny in the jar.
I put a sovereign in, if you like. But Gilbert and Sullivan, the history of the recordings of Gilbert and Sullivan is the history of recording of musical theatre in some senses. And there have been over the years lots of different recordings of any particular Gilbert and Sullivan show, and so there's a good historical piece of work to be done on comparing different recordings and what that tells you about the history of recordings. But
Thos will be doing that soon.
Very possibly. Other people have actually done so. But in the 60s is when the Decca albums for the D'Oyly Carte started including complete dialogue. But of course those shows were already 80 years old by then. So in a sense they weren't a surprise for the audience in the way that these new shows we're talking about today are. So once again, I don't think there's a right or wrong answer to this, but I like a Gilbert and Sullivan that's got dialogue in it if I'm listening to the album, but I don't think I'd want to hear a modern show with dialogue in it, because I would want to see that in the theatre. I think
it depends on whether it's, because there are some odd I mean, there's two things about this, but there are some odd bootlegs going around of live recordings of shows that never really
Yes.
got released.
Zenda!
Zenda, indeed. And
Return to Zender.
and Nick and Nora as well.
Indeed, yes, that's true.
So, which is interesting because you can finally listen to it and work out who the killer is. But the other thing was that during the 60s and 70s, a lot of shows were recorded and they didn't record all the numbers.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of, certainly Broadway musicals, where there are 2 or 3 numbers missing from the cast recording.
The original Follies is an absolute hack job.
Oh, is it?
Yeah. I think the first full recording of Follies was something like 6 years ago, something like that, remarkably.
But then it is a little bit difficult with something like Follies because the music is so... I'll let you finish screaming that in.
That's why he tells us that he's bored.
That element's going to be put on the outtakes rather than in the show.
Hang on, I'll have
But
a
with a
drink
lot
water.
of Sondheim shows as well, the music, the dialogue and the book really does seam into the music. So something like Sunday in the Park with George, or even Sweeney Todd, or one of the Sondheim shows that does have very short songs, and then it does need some dialogue in order to make it work.
The first
passion.
The first Sweeney Todd album I ever got for my 10th birthday was a vocal selection. Didn't have all the songs, so I have no idea what's happening. It would go from the opening, which I adored, to The Worst Pies in London, and then to...
She's in the furnace, let's go home.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's a good idea for context. I was just trying to think of something that would probably just need dialogue, like for example the Magic Flute. I know this is not a musical, but it's an opera.
But it's the nearest.
It's the nearest.
Because
Yeah.
because it is a book opera, isn't it?
It's the nearest to a modern musical out of probably all the operas, and there isn't actually an awful lot of dialogue in it. In fact, the last 20 minutes of it is entirely sung through, so you probably have a good sense of what was going on for the last 20 minutes because it's in its entirety. But if you missed out the dialogue throughout the rest of the beginning of it, you wouldn't know what was going on.
I mean,
So
I
you
watched
do
it with the
need to-
dialogue, and sometimes I remember what's going on.
So I think you really do need the dialogue so that like that. And GNS is the same. Like Pirates of Penzance doesn't have an awful lot of dialogue, I don't think.
Oh, it does.
Particularly
yes.
first act.
No,
I'm trying to think. First act doesn't have an awful lot of dialogue.
well, they've all got short scenes, but they do. I don't know. The Major
been a
General's
long
one of
time
those
since we did it.
characters that you don't come on to the end of the first half.
There's not
Basically,
an
poo
awful
on
lot of
stage and
dialogue.
they still clap. You know, so.
I'm trying to think back to when I did it. There isn't an awful lot of dialogue.
I know there's a lot. I mean, the thing that I'm remembering is when Samuel says, "Oh, women, I must go and hide behind this rock." I mean, you're right. It's throwaway stuff, isn't it, mostly?
I remember the one bit of Joseph that had a line, and I always seemed to enjoy that because it was the one
That's
line.
the book.
So I guess it's my turn to talk about an album that I've... it's not new to me, and it's very, very long. To go back to what I was saying, it's a double album, and it's of a show that's never aired here, which will give you a clue as to what it is, and it's called Gallivant. And it is a TV musical that was run for 2 series on ABC, lyrics by Glenn Slater and music by Alan Menken, and it's Disney making fun of Disney, really. Did you see it, Mike? As the
I didn't. It was recommended to me by many of my friends, but apparently I ignored all of that.
Oh,
I saw the bit that you forced me to watch, but yeah.
yes. It seems to me to be a bit like a poor man's Spamalot, because it's very...
Good God.
It's a very... We're in a fairy tale universe, and we're pirates, and we're giants, and we're lepers, and we're medieval people, and we're the king, and we're the princess, and we're going to sing a rap song because it's really funny.
2 series, you say?
2 series, yes.
I've seen both series.
Oh, go on, then.
And I think the second series is much better than the first series, but it does have some very funny songs in it, but it's very predictable. And the songs, you sit there going, "Oh, there's going to be a song in a moment," or this situation, but it plays with those tropes and predictions absolutely without any apology whatsoever, and I think it kind of works. You cannot go expecting anything other than cheesy buying into the fact of everything that people who say they hate musicals mention, it grabs those with both hands and shakes them.
There's an interesting point there, though, isn't it? I mean, it's got someone like Alan Menken attached to it, and he's a big name and a great talent. And yet, 2 series of, 26 episodes each, something like that? We're talking 50 episodes immediately, something like that. That's a conveyor belt of work.
Yes.
And
massive amount
but
of songs.
surely craft goes out of the window, or rather, quality goes out
They're
of the window.
not very long songs, but my biggest gripe with it, and everyone knows I'm the biggest Alan Menken fan in the world, but
Everyone loves the biggest Alan Menken.
the main theme in the piece is da 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 da, which is, I don't know if he did it on purpose or if it's just something in the back of his mind that makes him do it, but it's just it's the same theme from Beauty and the Beast.
But what they do is in the second series, in the very first episode, they start singing it.
They say,
and
"Stop."
What happens is they all the characters, they have this huge montage scene about how much they hate that song and that tune, and they've overused it in the first series. In fact, the first song is all about, we can't believe we've been commissioned to have another series, because everyone thought it was, and it's got a huge English cast in it. I mean,
Vinnie Jones.
Hugh Bonneville.
Yes, all done in Britain. And then randomly Kylie Minogue sings a song. I mean, it's got Disney's stamp all over it, which is quite fun.
Yes.
And it is Disney making fun of Disney. I just wish it was aired here. It was on Netflix or something like that, because
I'm going to ask you a significant question. I know the answer from you, but
Yes.
is it any good? Because that's not coming across.
Is it bad done well?
There are
It's a little
other
bit-
ways of doing bad.
That's
you
an
know.
awful thing. Is it bad done well? Yeah, it is.
Is it knowingly
It's
bad done
it's
well?
it's cheese done well. Let's put it that way.
Is it pantomimic?
Yes, it is. It just buys into every single fairy tale stereotype and unashamedly.
Oh,
Unashamedly.
Thank you.
It's easy for you to say.
It plays with them, and it doesn't make any apology, and
Like
it is very
Enchanted
silly. More so than Enchanted. I mean, yeah.
It sounds like the complete opposite to Crazy Ex-Girlfriend, another TV musical, which takes musical theatre tropes, but it's much more. It's not really. It's making fun of them, but it's not necessarily part of the story.
Oh, these are they're all very
book numbers.
diegetic. I had to get it in. Now we're all in the room. They're all very diegetic numbers, and they all come from the moment when they're in.
Well, that's the same with Crazy Ex-Girlfriend.
Yes, it is. Yes.
But why do you think it's been less successful than Crazy Ex-Girlfriend, which has been really popular?
Because it's for
It's quite old-fashioned, isn't it?
it's from us.
Well, I think
It's for people. But it's for people who love musicals because they are musicals.
whereas I guess Crazy Ex-Girlfriend, you don't have to like
That's a
musicals
weird
to like
thing
it.
to say.
But this takes us on to a discussion that Mike and I have had, which is, pop will ultimately eat itself and seems to do so all the time.
Let's hope so.
There are now squillions of musicals where they send up the tropes of musicals. Urinetown is a fine example. Is it not possible to write a sincere musical anymore?
I was going to ask this exact question.
Well, you were
just
right to
with
think
more
about it.
vitriol and bitterness.
Yes. I'm
I
repressing that, if that's any help.
feel like we hit the peak of let's make fun of conventions of musical theater in a very explicit referential way with Spamalot. And I think the chief contribution of
Nadir,
Spamalot.
I think is the word you're looking
Thank
for.
you. The
Or
nadir,
that,
the inverted
I
P.
think even more so with, sorry to interrupt, that dreadful Something Rotten.
Oh, I like Something Rotten.
I don't feel like Something Rotten made fun of the conventions of musical theater. It referred to them and it incorporated them into the plot in a very literal way in this strange time travel. I guess there was one song that was cycling through the performance tropes of musical theater, but most of the time when something is making fun of musical theater, I've experienced it to be a little mean-hearted. There's often a spirit of ridicule, which is definitely true in Spamalot, definitely true in Urinetown.
Not affectionate.
Not at all, especially
The
not in
producers did it affectionately. Thos's favourite show.
It so is not.
I know, it's been
But the
sarcastic.
producers was also a show about a show, so the subject matter was a performance of a musical, so it comes across a little differently. And I think you can refer to musical theater tropes in a kind of loving, teasing way and then in a mean-hearted way. And I am just sick to death of the mean-hearted teasing references.
It's also become lazy.
I don't think Gallivant is mean-hearted. I think it embraces it quite lovingly. It's just that people who go, I hate musicals, were watching it. That's why I hate musicals. Whereas it's not a nasty jive because they. But I know what you mean by that.
I shouldn't judge it, but it doesn't sound sophisticated enough to be clever. And if it's not clever and it's just pie in your face, isn't this funny, this is what happens in musicals, then meh, I've seen that 1,000 times.
That is judging, actually.
And I was lying because I am on this planet to judge, and I've made a lifestyle choice out of that. And you know, I'm awfully good.
Well, I think we should make Thos watch Crazy Ex-Girlfriend, because in Crazy Ex-Girlfriend, they usually take the...
Just not my bag. There are so many non-life choices in there.
It makes fun of musical theatre, but in a clever way. Like when they do the Settle For Me song, when they do the Fred and Ginger number,
yes.
They're not necessarily making fun of musical theatre, they're using it to actually make a point about relationships.
Yes, I don't
so they're
think
actually using it in a smart way.
Crazy Ex-Girlfriend isn't nasty towards musical theatre, I think.
Well, can we also make a difference here? I think referencing musical theatre is quite different from sending musical theatre up. You called it the Fred and Ginger number for a start.
It was.
That's a reference. That's not a send up, is it?
Yeah, but they send up the idea of like. So it's meant to be this amazing musical theatre moment where two people meet one another and they're meant to be in love instantly, but actually one of the characters is singing "You Should Be in Love with Me Because," and the other girl isn't so keen. So it's like the idea of it's meant to be this romantic number, but it's not a romantic number.
But is that a send up or is that an undercut? Because that sounds quite different to me.
I think it is sending up Fred and Ginger because there's lots of jokes.
No, it's not, because I don't think it's sending up Fred and Ginger because they are dancing as well as Fred, or with the style without. Then they're not sending it up because they're not ridiculing it. They're using it as a
vehicle
with a twist, presumably.
Yeah, they're ridiculing the situation that they are in, and they're using that style to just highlight their moment. But I don't think it's as nasty as like you've said, some.
You're in Town. Or...
Well, that's interesting because I've never seen You're in Town, but I didn't know You're in Town sends up.
I don't know at all.
There's two kind of characters who come out from the plot. Presumably, if there was a curtain change on the original, but and they come out and they talk to each other about what tropes you're going to be getting, and this is what happens in a musical kind of thing. But it's not done.
Oh, I see.
It's not done with heart.
Oh, okay.
Or even Richard Rodgers.
There really seems to be a there really does seem to be a kind of mean-spiritedness in the second act in particular, where they're cycling through a number of genres of musical theatre and pop, and seem to be doing it just for pointing out how insubstantial they are or how hollow they are lyrically, because they're being always employed sarcastically, and that's really the spirit of that whole show. And there's something similar, I think, in Spamalot going on. There's a whole lot of just trying to make fun of the audience for liking this kind of musical, and perhaps making fun of themselves and making fun of the tradition itself.
Well, there's a whole number about the Jewish background in musical theatre, which was cut here because we don't have that history in, you know.
I sat through that on Broadway, and it was really uncomfortable.
Were people laughing though?
They were. I was uncomfortable that they were laughing.
It's easy to teeter over into something rather darker, isn't it? Than that kind of thing.
And they replaced it here with "You won't succeed in show business if you don't have a star," which is a much better message, I think, than
Well, it's just dangerous.
Yes, but it's also much more about our tradition than the Broadway tradition, dare I say, where, you know, we will stunt cast anything to...
As does that show, in fact.
Yeah. You know, pantomimes and stuff like that. So, who knew Gallivant would lead to such an interesting discussion? What were you last listening to, Dominic?
I was listening to Henry Sweet Henry.
Of course you were.
Which is the musical version of The World of Henry Orient, which was it was actually based on the book by Nunnally Johnson.
There's no one in the room who's going to say that's wrong, so we'll go with that.
Yeah, okay. I should have said it. Let me do it again. It's written by Nunnally Johnson. And it was made into a film with Peter Sellers and Angela
Rippon.
Lansbury.
Thank you. Lansbury.
Lansbury for us posh
Lansbury, Thos. Not Lansbury.
Angela Lansbury.
And I love it. It didn't run very long on Broadway because at the time, I'm not sure whether it was Frank Rich, but one of the major critics was really trying to push the turn towards pop musicals. And it's a very traditional...
When was it?
It was 1970...
Something.
I'll look it up. And it's Don Amici in the stage version. And, well, I don't really have much to say about that apart from
Is it
I
any
enjoy
good?
it.
Oh, right.
Yes, I think it's great. Now,
Never heard of it.
I will tell you, it was Michael Kidd did the. Oh no, hold on for a moment.
For those of you listening at home, Dominic is looking up information on his iPad.
I'm just trying to. I think Michael Kidd did the choreography, and it is. Oh, the music and lyrics were by Bob Merrill.
Okay.
And it was 1967, and it closed after 80 performances and 12 previews. So, and Michael Bennett, not Michael Kidd, Michael Bennett did the music, and it starred, amongst other people, Pia Zadora.
That's very young. She must have been in 1967.
She was. Well, she plays. They play schoolgirls. So, do you know Pia Zadora? Pia Zadora. For the benefit of the tape, Nick is widening his eyes. And does anyone else?
Yes, Pia Zadora. Actually, I don't think she's nearly as bad as her reputation has always said. I've got an album of hers with Nelson Riddle, which is perfectly listenable to. But she famously played Anne Frank, didn't she? She is.
There is
she's the famous Anne Frank story.
Yes, which is that she was so bad, or allegedly, isn't it? She was so bad that when the Nazis came in, somebody in the audience stood up and went, "She's in the attic." So she's won both the Golden Raspberry Award for the worst actress and the worst new star at some point. She gets a lot of
shtick.
A lot of shtick. But Henry
she's not
Sweet
as
Henry
bad as all that, by the way.
And she's one of the chorus in Henry Sweet Henry. And you can see her, and there's an Ed Sullivan clip which is on YouTube.
I was speaking of Michael Bennett. I was watching a documentary yesterday about Hamilton, and they were saying that there hadn't been such a groundbreaking piece of musical theatre in New York since A Chorus Line. And I sat back and thought, was that piece really that groundbreaking at the time?
Chorus Line?
Yeah.
Yes. Yes.
Okay, good. Well, that answers that question.
Would you care to elaborate?
Well, I just, when I saw it, it just seemed, I guess because of things like Britain's Got Talent and X Factor and all that crap we're more used to people bearing their souls and talking about the audition process. But I guess it must have been. Thos, you rolled your eyes when Hamilton was referred to as a groundbreaking piece of musical theatre.
Well, I don't think you can tell it's groundbreaking until we find out what its legacy is, and it's far too early to say what that is at this stage.
With regards to the chorus line being groundbreaking, it was because the way that they put together the workshop musical was interesting, because it actually spoke to so many different people, so many different dancers and performers, and basically I think they literally got them in a room and got them to record their stories, and that's how they came up with the idea of a chorus line. And basically, as they were workshopping it, they basically kept referring back to these tapes and these performers, and people kept adding their own stories into it. And obviously it's about dancers and ensemble members that don't normally get to be in the spotlights. I think in that sense it's quite interesting, because it's not about the big stars, it's about the people that keep the show running.
But can I ask a question? Why is that groundbreaking? What show then followed on afterwards that was similar in style? How was the ground broken?
There is a similar show, I'm trying to think what it's called. Oh, I can't remember.
Another chorus line.
But was it groundbreaking because there wasn't anything
like that before?
That's what I mean.
What do you mean? So it's groundbreaking.
What comes after?
So it paves the way because people want to imitate it.
Yeah.
So
I don't disagree with you.
I'm trying to think. There is a show that's really similar. I'm trying to think what it's called, but it's gone from my brain.
Because I can't see what the legacy of the chorus line is.
Could it be the decentralization of the protagonist to more of an ensemble cast approach, which we certainly can see in subsequent shows?
That's fair.
I wasn't reading as groundbreaking as necessarily having a legacy, but obviously the whole meaning of groundbreaking is that you're breaking the ground for other things to
be built
happen.
on. Yeah, you break ground to build on.
Yes, so I hadn't actually thought about that. I was thinking of it being
as something that had never been done before. I think that's when the term is generally used.
Oh, that's a gimmick.
Everyone's got to have a gimmick. But yes, I think that's a really interesting round table discussion about just random musicals.
But that's interesting that people have thought that.
About this conversation.
And Hamilton,
correct if you have.
That Hamilton is the first one since Chorus Line. And I'm sure there would have been
That's what I
shows that have blown people away and...
Well, people thought Les Mis was groundbreaking.
No,
because
but
it took
the Americans are talking about purely their own musicals.
Oh, right, their own musicals. Well,
As we do.
Americans don't like to consider Cats or Les Mis or Phantom when it comes to
Absolutely.
even though
Eminently
Les
good
Mis fans
taste on their
so
part.
many years in Broadway, I'm a Phantom.
But those
so
are very traditional shows. That what was unusual about them was the production paradigm, but not the content of the show.
Yes.
In fact, they're very backward-looking. You know, people know my argument, but I still think that you can trace a kind of history back to a British operetta for them. If someone said to me, what is the most groundbreaking piece of musical theatre of the last 50 years, I wouldn't have an answer. But it certainly wouldn't be a chorus line.
Well,
I think.
everything seems to stem back from somewhere, like you say, like Hamilton is sung through. It's like a hip hop opera. So it does have roots in musical theatre. Everything does.
Might be a good discussion because we're heading off to do another episode soon, so it might be a good discussion to put to Jonathan because I certainly know his answer, and that'd be West Side Story. As far as that was a massively groundbreaking.
But how?
Why don't we make this a cliffhanger?
Tonya, you've
I
been
know.
in-
I know.
you-
Jonathan's answer on this will probably be something to do with like the Latin rhythm not being used in a musical up until that point. Like it's very groundbreaking in the sense that hadn't been done before. But I mean,
And
there
it
are
was
still roots.
also, they'd never done a show which had a very heavy chorus characters. And it was a
Ensemble
dance
characters.
show. It was very,
a dance show.
it
Well,
was
again,
very-
yeah.
Now, whether shows have imitated it, but are we
Can I just say
saying that-
Carmen Miranda? The idea that that's the first musical that had a Latin rhythm is nonsense. It might be the first good one.
Oh, yes. Well,
Well, I think it's the first one that captures people's imaginations. I don't think necessarily people have
Well, it was
latched
used
onto music like that
for-
before.
But I think this is just us forgetting our past. I just think our history goes back to West Side Story and it doesn't go back to the 30s.
Well, yeah,
Yours does.
Yeah, mine does.
With regards to, with regards to West Side Story, there is that, but there's also the fact that it is like an opera. There are operatic elements in West Side Story. It's not completely new; it's an entirety. There
And
are
I think the
elements of it
subject
that go
matter
back.
probably had a lot to do with it as well. It was violent, it was raw, it was
Tragedy, yeah.
tragedy, it was focusing on issues at the time. They didn't go with the Jewish idea, which they were going to go with, thank goodness.
Can I just say Porgy and Bess?
Or Showboat.
Yeah, thank you.
Well, Showboat certainly was.
Yeah.
And I think that one might be
groundbreaking.
Yeah.
genuinely
But
groundbreaking.
something can be groundbreaking and produce shows that are not necessarily good.
Oh, indeed. In fact,
There's a lot of people
every Stephen Sondheim.
and also
Thereafter.
after Legally Blonde and things like that, and after any Pasek and Paul show, and Dear Evan Hansen, you listen to a lot of shows and they've all got the same sound, and you're thinking, oh, but they don't do
but
it
watered down.
as well.
Yeah.
And people try to copy Sondheim all the time, and
Everything becomes homeopathic, doesn't it? It becomes massively diluted
yes,
without any potency.
Is that what that word means?
Basically, yes. You're taking a millionth degree of whatever is supposed to be an active ingredient and water it down in water. Homeopathic drunkenness. I'm sure I'll get emails complaining about this, but homeopathic drunkenness is to throw a glass of wine into a swimming pool and then do a paddle with your mouth open.
People considered Rodgers and Hammerstein to be groundbreaking because they were moving away from sort of whimsical musicals.
They
and
also were
being-
groundbreaking.
Yeah.
But how?
Well,
I
that
give you
one's
Porgy
easy.
and Bess,
Well, that one's easy because people.
which is earlier.
It was about book musicals, wasn't it? They
But
weren't.
Thos is in the school of thought that Rodgers and Hart were the true trendsetters, weren't they? It was
Am I of this opinion?
No.
I don't remember
very
ever,
much in your mouth,
don't
Thos.
remember ever saying that or
No,
thinking
but-
it, but apart from that, you're absolutely correct.
But Porgy and Bess. So why was that groundbreaking? In the sense of, was it groundbreaking because did people emulate it? But it was a spectacular moment in theatrical.
Well, my view is it's the first of what might be called the serious music. I know it isn't because you've got Showboat, etc. I mean, you can always trace some kind of antecedent, but my view is of the Rodgers and Hammerstein model that we think of, I think, comes very heavily from Porgy and Bess. And I think it's a great pity that Gershwin died when he did. I think if he'd lived another 5 years, another 10 years, we'd have had a second one of those. And what you sometimes need is a second show for the first one to be seen as groundbreaking. I mean, people are talking about Allegro as being groundbreaking now. But it's taking a very long time for that to become the view. It used to be thought of as a massive failure.
Yes.
So actually, you do need the legacy, you do need the history, you need years to work out what's actually groundbreaking. And which is why I'm not yet convinced for Hamilton taking us back to that.
For Hamilton to prove to be groundbreaking, you would need to see more hip-hop musicals based on historical figures.
No, I don't think it's as reductive as that.
They're doing one based on the suffragettes, aren't they? A British hip-hop musical based on the suffragettes. So the style is trickling into musical theatre.
Whether it be any good or not.
Once again, they're going to be carbon copies, aren't they?
Yeah.
I've actually got a friend who was in the tryout for that. So, but I mean, what it's made me think is, well, it's
going to be called Show Vote.
But groundbreaking obviously is different for certain people. I mean, I was looking at it as very much a word of what are the theatrical shows that made a huge impact. My Fair Lady was groundbreaking because it did change the face of Broadway.
But it's so backwards looking. I love My Fair Lady, but it's absolutely an operetta. Completely.
Oh,
it's an Edwardian play, for goodness sake.
Yes, I know, but it did change. It did change the way Broadway was viewed overnight, though, and with popular musicals.
I think what people, I think what the problem is, people when they think about something that's groundbreaking, they're only really thinking about today and the where we are today. They tend to forget the history and where we've come from. I think that's the problem.
That's why musical talk exists.
So Hamilton, people are probably only thinking about musical theatre that happened over the last 10 years. I don't think necessarily they're thinking about...
Well, they were probably only born in the last 10 years, to be honest.
I think we can look at Hamilton as decontextualizing hip-hop from a urban scenario. So in contrast, In the Heights was using hip-hop in an environment and a story and with characters that you would associate hip-hop. It's kind of a very contemporary urban environment. New York City makes perfect sense that they'd be rapping. But Hamilton is taking hip-hop and yanking it out of its natural context, much as Jesus Christ Superstar took prog rock and did the same thing. So in that sense, I think it will be groundbreaking in that we will stop thinking of hip-hop as strictly something from the streets and something that's that has wider applicability.
Well, it does help to tell the story in Hamilton. It's a storytelling device. It's not just a style. It's like, hey, let's write it in hip-hop style. It is actually a storytelling device. It's useful to the story.
It's the best... medium to use because it has more words in it than any other style of music.
That doesn't make it better.
But it has a lot of story to tell, and they said if this were an opera, it would last a day.
Well, that will be a badly written opera.
Because there's that much.
I think that's silly because they've managed to put Les Mis into a whole evening, and it's
once again that's a throwaway line that doesn't mean anything when you analyse it.
This is what they said in the document.
Well, they are wrong.
Which came first, Hamilton or Bloody Andrew Jackson?
Bloody Andrew Jackson preceded.
So that came first. So could you say that Bloody Andrew Jackson is a groundbreaking musical because?
Has anyone heard of it?
Well, it did well on off Broadway. It was off Broadway, wasn't it? But it does occasionally appear in America. It's not been done here.
But you can just say that's retreading the ground. Let's mixing metaphor. Broken by Jesus Christ Superstar, and that you have rock out of context,
right?
But not hip hop specifically.
Okay, so it's just using and of course, Two Gentlemen of Verona uses it's rock music, isn't it, for the musical version of that?
I think at this point we don't think it's strange to hear contemporary music in an antiquated setting, but prior to Hamilton, it wasn't that common with hip hop specifically. And I think Hamilton has given people permission, or maybe encouragement is a better word, to do that kind of switch. There is a hip-hop version of Othello, but...
Yeah, Catch My Soul. No.
Is that what it's called?
Oh, no, that's a rock version.
No, I think it's called O, but I also, if memory serves...
Yes, it is.
That has also been time-shifted to the present, so I guess it's not quite the same thing.
Yes, there is. It is O. It is called
I gotta say, I would love to hear a musical talk episode from Thos after you've seen Hamilton, where you then go back and listen to all your prior opinions of Hamilton and see if they hold up after you've seen the show.
Yeah, and if I'm wrong, I should be glad to say so. I've never said it's a bad show. I've just said that
you're not
I'm not interested.
I'm kind of the same place as you, so I'd be quite interested in seeing it with you because I think that would be...
Well, maybe we should. That's the way to do it.
We should actually try and do that.
Let me tell you a secret.
Okay.
I'm not interested in Les Miserables, and I have never seen it. for that very reason.
Yeah, well, that's true. I'm not interested in it, but I have seen it. So.
That's what got me into musical. Well, not really. GNS got me to musical theatre, but when I was like 16, I watched Les Mis, the video.
It's aimed at 16-year-olds.
Well, that's the thing. But I mean, I don't like it now, but
Yeah.
I'm appreciative when it comes to Les Mis because it's what got me into performing. It's what got me into singing more operatic music. So.
But once again, I'm not saying it's a bad show. I
Yeah.
just have no interest whatsoever.
But do you sometimes go and see something that is out of your comfort zone?
Yes.
You see plenty of things.
I see plenty of things which are out of my comfort
And
zone.
I've listened to episodes where you've been talking about shows, and you're very good because if you really hated a show, you won't talk about it.
Yeah.
So, which I think is a great way to do it.
The musical talk black archive.
Yes.
But thus, you're quite willing to listen to indie shows that are musically very contemporary and very tongue-in-cheek, and so I don't feel like Hamilton would be that a bridge too far to cross.
I am going to see Hamilton. I'm going to wait 3 years before I can get a ticket. I'm
can
also
get
not going to
You
spend
can
it,
get tickets.
and I'm not going to pay through the nose.
You don't have to
because,
pay for those.
but I'm not interested enough to do it yet. I will do it. I guarantee I'll do it, and I'll be glad to talk on Musical Talk about it. And I'm very happy to eat my hat if eating my hat is what needs to be done. But as I say, the issue is I have never said that there's anything wrong with it.
It's the hype.
But I am absolutely appalled by the hype, and forgive me, I haven't heard anything today so far that makes me think any differently.
I think the hype.
They are saying
I think the hype has died down here, and it certainly
that the
hasn't
score was
had-
written in gold leaf.
and it certainly hasn't had the effect that it had in New York. Thank God, because it seemed every newspaper article that came out was Hamilton does this, Lin-Manuel Miranda takes a shit, all this kind of stuff.
Because has anybody seen Spamilton?
Not yet.
Not yet. I really want to.
That's at the
Many a chocolate
Menagerie,
factory.
isn't it? So, which is interesting, and I mean, I'd quite like to see that.
But you might be saying you hate parody musicals.
I'm not a huge fan of them, except in the sense of seeing people on stage goofing off and having a good time. I tend to see them as just diversions.
Atmosphere.
Yeah, exactly. And
no
it's
craft.
perfectly fine to sit down, but if you're expecting an actual book musical experience, you will always be disappointed by parody musicals because they're, by nature, they are meant to ridicule something else.
But now,
And can't
do you-
exist in their own right.
Just on a side note, do you know PDQ Bark?
Oh, yeah, yeah.
So, because now, what do you have because he wrote, what is he called? The Abduction of Figaro, which is a parody opera.
But you wouldn't sit down to see that expecting an opera. You're expecting a Weird Al-like
Oh, I see what you mean.
parody
You are
experience.
actually going there fully aware. Yes, I see what you mean. Yes.
And in that case, I also think it was more respectful of its source material than a lot of parody musicals.
Yes, he's always respectful of the things that he spoofs.
And he's a very accomplished classical composer who was trained at Juilliard, and he's got all the credentials, and he's...
So are you just saying his bark is better than his bite?
Ah, yes.
that was a work of art, I have to say.
But that is true. When you get someone who is very good at their skill, when they parody it or take the mickey out of it, it can be genius. I mean, I don't know if any of you know Jonathan and Darlene Edwards.
Yes.
So,
Goodness me.
but the
There's Paul Weston and
yes, and
her.
oh, that's
She's
terrible.
brilliant. Oh yeah.
But it is incredible.
This is why I think
how
you two are
bad.
separated at birth.
But when you listen to it, it's hysterically funny.
Fine
but
injunction.
There's no way it would be that funny if he could not play the piano brilliantly.
Yeah. It's, yeah.
Do you think that's why? Sorry. Do you think that's why Forbidden Broadway is so successful? Because it's not really doing anything to the music. It's all keeping the music as it is.
And also it's
But I-
performed so brilliantly, and the lyrics are so perfectly done. Sometimes they're even funnier than the original songs that they're parodying.
This goes back to making fun of music and musicals
Yeah.
in a loving way as
But it's-
opposed to
yes, yeah.
But can I say, let's be honest about Forbidden Broadway. Yes, it's a stage show, but no, it's a set of albums.
But I mean, going back to it about earlier, I always enjoyed listening to them. But when I saw my first Forbidden Broadway show, it was so much more fun. It was much more funnier, much more funnier, much more funnier, much more.
It was funnier.
It was increasingly
funnier.
chucklesome.
It was highly amusing. It was more funny because
Did you find it funny, Nick?
it was more funny
Very good.
because the costumes were great. The choreography.
Yeah, well, it's obviously more to see than just listening to it. But let's be honest, which takes us almost back to the beginning of our
Yeah.
conversation today, actually. You know, you asked the question, would you listen to an album before you went to see the show? And we were talking about those. There are some shows where you have to listen to the album, and that's our only access into those shows. In real terms, you know, we're not going to see the Ziegfeld Follies of 1936 revised again in our lifetimes. So Forbidden Broadway, I think, although it's still a live and active set of things, it is the albums most of us engage with. Everyone's got at least a couple knocking around in their collection. I saw it once. I thought it was fantastic. I know they do a new version of it every year, but I wouldn't see it again.
But it's interesting it's taken Hamilton for him to do a complete parody of it, and that's never been done before. And he's also rewritten it for the British audience, which would be really interesting to see, because I've only listened to the cast recording of Spamilton, and I didn't get a lot of it because it was very focused on the New York hype. In the Heights is actually one of the was one of the songs from going back to In the Heights.
Thank you for elaborating this.
It's all right. So it'd be interesting to see, but
I feel like behind every parody musical is the implied question:
why isn't he writing real musicals?
No, that's clear.
And the rosette for the evening goes to Michael.
The question is, wouldn't it be funny if, and the answer is always no. Parodies are funny for the duration of a Weird Al song, which is about 3 minutes and 5 seconds, and then they're just not. And especially if you're seeing a parody of a whole show, what is going to sustain you through that? The parody musicals I've seen that are most successful weren't really musicals. They were just almost like variety shows. Lots of goofy stuff, lots of diversions, and you weren't going through the process of aping the entire arc of a character of a musical, because it's just going to stop
It was a review,
being funny.
wasn't it, in real terms?
Ish. It was kind of like in that style.
Therefore, what's your view on improvised musicals? Because when I was in LA last, I went to the Second City or Citizens Brigade or something like that.
UCB, yeah.
And I saw an improvised musical. And it was great fun. And we talked to the Showstopper people, and it's still running in London. You can go and see an improvised musical. And it's very, very skillful, very, very funny. What's your view on them, Mike?
I think all improv is a double art form. You're appreciating what's going on stage, and you're also appreciating the real-time process of creating it. So if you saw a show on Broadway and an actor stumbled or laughed or made a mistake, you would be outraged, whereas it's kind of fun in improv because you know the skills that these performers bring to the stage. You sympathize with them almost like characters. You think, how are they going to come up with something to answer that so quickly? And it's a delight when they do, and it's
You're right, the
understandable.
empathy quotient is much higher in a show like that.
It is.
Yeah.
It is, because we so admire what they're undertaking. So I think we can look at improv anything as just, it's like juggling. It's this real-time, deft act of skill, and it can be a lot of fun. But we still wouldn't see an improvised musical. We wouldn't treat it like a real musical or even a real musical.
You wouldn't buy the album to listen to again, would you?
No, that's a very good point. It really has to be at that moment to be experienced.
And I can say I have actually lived through that experience once. It wasn't a musical, but I went to see a show in Edinburgh, which will remain nameless. It was ostensibly a Sherlock Holmes parody, but what it turned out to be, as far as I can gather from the sources I've heard, is they had done an improvised show the year before, and then they'd written it down and then tried to do it as a play, and it had the texture and enjoyment of congealed vomit. So
I just wanted to go back to something someone said earlier, where we were talking about parody shows.
Every time Dominic opens his mouth, you do something noisy. Just sit still.
I'm just going to play the drums. You carry on, Dom.
Well, no, I can't remember how it linked, but it was before we talked about the improvisational musicals. But the fact is that The Boyfriend was written as a parody of The Girlfriend.
It was Richard Rodgers.
Yes, and so it was absolutely a spoof of 1920s musicals. And it became bigger than the thing it was spoofing.
Yeah, no one's actually ever heard of The Girlfriend anymore.
So, and now it works as a show completely in its own right, whereas it had all the affectations of the
Girlfriend.
Of the Girlfriend. They are re-releasing, I believe, from a little source that I heard, they may be releasing soon the recording of The Girlfriend, which was done in Ipswich many years ago.
Good Lord.
And they took the Girlfriend, which is about the bicycle race, and they also took a musical called Kitty's Kisses, and they merged the two, and they've made a show, and they did it at Ipswich, and they're very soon going to re-release the album. Anyway,
Very
you heard it here first.
You did. speaking of improvisation, well done for coming up with this wonderful episode based on one question. I think we've done rather well. My thanks go to Thos, Antonia, Mike, and Dom. And Thos, have a lovely time in Edinburgh.
Thank you.
Shut up!
Although by the time this goes out,
You would
I'll have come back from Edinburgh.
How was Edinburgh, Thos?
It was still very warm.
Can you say if there's, or do you prefer not to, if there's anything you're really looking forward to?
There's a couple of shows, yes, but this will be dead for now. Let's finish the episode and I'll tell you as we're walking to Jonathan's.
Goodbye. So we are sat around Jonathan Cohen's
No, you are sitting around my
outside table, and we are going to be asking Jonathan the question we asked a couple of weeks. Well, the result of a discussion we had. Jonathan, what do you think is, in your mind, a groundbreaking musical?
And why?
And why?
And what does that mean?
And what does groundbreaking mean?
Take notes.
Oh, I've got 3 questions to answer. Well, I would think Oklahoma it's widely considered a groundbreaking musical, isn't it? Because it was one of the first musical not to have big chorus line at the beginning and a huge chorus and all that, and it just starts off with one person singing off stage.
A cappella.
A cappella. So that broke a sort of mould, didn't it, I think?
We discovered in the discussion what other shows then did that.
Well, the Yeoman of the Guard originally.
But that's not a musical, is it?
That's a moot point. But yes, but it has been done before. But at that time, it was identified. This is Gilbert and Sullivan, obviously.
And it's American. In America, they wouldn't have done, probably, because...
Well, they'll have had Yeoman of the Guard over there, and indeed they still do. But at the time when Gilbert did it originally, because he was his own director, it was marked out as being something that was thought of being very unusual, very odd to open the stage with a curtain and just having a single woman on the stage at her spinning wheel, I think, singing her opening number.
Right.
So that doesn't in itself make it original. I think we're all interested to know what makes... Let's use Oklahoma. I think it's something we can all talk about. Why is it groundbreaking? Well, and on what basis?
But also, isn't it the fact that it was music? The music actually advances the story rather than people stopping and just singing a number for the sake of singing a number. Then everybody applauds, and then you get a bit of dialogue, and then wasn't it one of these where the songs were actually part of the whole storytelling and the action?
I'm probably going to be principal advocate here.
I could be completely
devil's
wrong.
Advocate, that is. But what about Porky and Bears?
Again, that's an opera.
Right. Let's open that one up. Do you think so? I suppose.
Well, it is an opera, but of course that originally was sung through like an opera would be, and it didn't work. And then they changed it, did they not? And it became a success only when they added dialogue. But I still think it's an opera.
So we should... that's an interesting distinction. Is Oklahoma therefore the first musical? What about Opera-homa?
But what about Showboat was the first one to put a serious story, wasn't it?
It was, and that was earlier, of course, wasn't it?
1928.
1928, and of course that's quoted as being actually, isn't it, the first one to really integrate the whole thing in
book and score.
And yet I think it's regarded as a transitional work rather than solidly landing the integrated musical format, because there are some numbers like Old Man River that seem to be just atmospheric and not
and they're standalones, aren't they?
Pull outable.
Yes.
Yeah.
Although it's very difficult with Showboat to know precisely what the speech marks, what the score is, because Kern and Hammerstein carried on writing songs for it for the rest of their lives. And I was once told, I think I heard it on Benny Green's radio programme, but if you put all the songs together, you got something like 24 hours worth of material. You could do the all-day Bayreuth version. Sorry?
Candide is the same.
Is it?
Because
the numbers haven't changed so much in Candide, have they?
There's a lot of numbers that don't get put in and get taken out.
Yes, but also the dialogue's been changed and changed. Yeah. I saw it fairly recently because Rosie Ash played the old woman with one buttock.
I saw her do Cunegonde years ago.
What did she do with
exactly?
One buttock.
Well, she did Cunegonde for Scottish Opera, and that was the one that John Macheri did. Yes. I think it was that one, and that was considered to be the first Candide that really worked.
Yes.
Recently, Opera della Luna did it. It was a rather good production, and Rosie played the old woman, as I say. And that was the production... Are we going off... I think we're off piece here, never mind. That was they used the National Theatre version of it, because they felt that was closer to Voltaire than the other ones were. I'm just trying to think.
But it's interesting you mentioned...
It's too long. I mean, it was about 3 hours or something, and it's about half an hour too long.
Because we predicted that your answer would actually be West Side Story.
I knew you'd say that, which is precisely why I didn't say West Side Story. But now you mention it, I would say yes, because I'd just gone to...
It was at the opening night.
I'd just gone to grammar school, and somebody at school was sitting upstairs, and he had a record with him, and it was the cast recording of West Side Story with Carol Lawrence and Larry Kurt and all those people, Chita Rivera, of course, and he played Something's Coming, and I went, oh my God, this is unbelievable. And I remember taking it home and my mother saying she'd never heard anything like it, because it was extraordinary, because it was sort of Stravinsky, wasn't it? I mean, it's very Stravinsky-esque, and he's very influenced by it, but there was something about Something's Coming, we just thought, my God, this is
So the rites of spring in your step.
Yes, but I remember going on my 11th birthday to see it, and just thinking it was the most extraordinary thing. One thing I know, because I'm cursed or blessed with something called absolute pitch, so I know what the numbers are. And I remember Something's Coming. It's in D major, and it was put down to C major because whoever took over wasn't going to sing it up there. It was down a tone, and it sort of made a difference, rather.
But does that make the music groundbreaking, or does it make the piece of theatre groundbreaking?
I think the piece of theatre is groundbreaking,
Well, it's
isn't it?
one of the first big dance musicals.
Yeah.
So
Yes, because it was told in dance, wasn't it? And so much of it, and having the prologue with
no singing.
setting everything up and what was happening and what had happened historically between the gangs and all that was amazing. And actually, to expect an audience to sit through that and not a word being uttered.
And how did the British audience react to
They went mental.
Did the Americans, Mike? Because you were there, obviously, as well.
Did they go mental? Is that
Yeah.
what you're asking?
I mean,
I think intelligent people did.
Well, it was rightly celebrated, wasn't it?
Can we think
That
of
was
any
very
musicals
popular.
that don't have singing in the opening, like similarly? Because we've always
Actually, no.
we've
Carousel. Carousel has a huge prologue at the beginning where there's no singing or dancing.
That is true.
It's a blessed relief, I tell you.
Yeah.
But it's sort of an overture, isn't it? Really,
It is, but it's
Carousel?
usually done.
Yeah, it is now, but was it
Stage.
then?
Yeah. Oh,
Yeah.
right. Yes.
But the thing about West Side, thinking about
Oh, no,
that
it
and what
is.
Michael was saying, is it?
I think so. There's a whole section which is. It is pantomime. It's
it goes on for about 19 minutes.
pantomime in the
or something.
sense of the real sense
Mime.
of the word.
Yeah.
Right, mime, yes.
Yeah.
There was something Michael just said about West Side Story. I can't think what we were saying
What did you
there.
just say about West Side Story,
The
Mike?
slightest idea.
Maybe you didn't. Maybe it was Dom.
No, it wasn't.
And it
But
being
it-
popular in America.
Oh yes, about it being popular in America. According to Sondheim or whoever, what was I reading fairly recently about it? It wasn't the big smash hit that everybody thought it was until it was made into the movie.
It
Which is
didn't win the
superior,
Tony
too.
Award either.
What, the movie's
that year.
superior?
It is, yeah.
Sorry?
Do you
It
think
didn't
so?
win the Tony Award.
I mean, I loved it. I absolutely loved it. But there was so much.
Well, the Tony Award went to Music Man.
Yeah, it didn't win
Because
the
it was
Tony Award.
Oh no!
It's a lot
Yeah.
more about American values, and that's why I wondered what the American reaction. to
But
West
it
Side
did
Story
become an
was.
enormous hit. The film. The problem with the film, I felt, was that because it was censorship was still around, they couldn't use half the dialogue, and they had to change it for the
Abridged
film,
slightly,
didn't
yeah.
they? Yeah, and sort of, and also the fact that again the score was transposed in many cases. And it was too fast. It's only recently I've thought this, because I absolutely was mad about the film for ages. I was obsessed with it. But thinking about it now, it lost something. It was overblown. The orchestration was huge, and they sort of made it sometimes they made it a little bit too soupy because they had a huge orchestra, because it was. And the fact that they insisted on overdubbing people even when they could sing.
Do you remember anything Marnie Nixon said
It might
about
have
it?
been a
Yes, everything. But
But wasn't she saying that Natalie Wood was had her nose really quite put out of
Yeah,
Oh, she was very upset
she'd
because she
actually
was
done
teaching training.
She was told that she would be singing, wasn't she? She was told that she would be singing parts, and she did sing her parts, and you can
Recorded it.
see it. You can see it, some of it. I mean, her voice isn't nearly. I mean, she's quite musical, but I mean, because you need a proper singer. And the difficulty was, normally, if you're lip syncing, the person would already have sung the thing, and then you would lip sync on screen. Poor Marnie Nixon had to lip sync to Natalie Wood and follow the breathing that was on
Which
screen.
wasn't correct with the rhythm. I feel pretty. She wouldn't do I feel pretty. She would
No,
do I feel pretty.
That's right.
And it really bugged Manny Nixon because she wanted to do what was written.
I know, and that's
couldn't.
down a tone. That's down in somewhere ridiculous, And you think it could have been done so much better. But they are talking about doing a new film of it.
They are. Steven Spielberg is on board.
Is he?
Yes. So good luck with that.
And also, I was upset because they cut the dream sequence. I know it's difficult to do in films, but they have done it, and that music is lovely. And somewhere coming from, I think it was Rory Grist or somebody who sang the original.
Isn't it?
No,
I'm sure there's a.
I don't remember the dream sequence
No,
at all,
it's
and
not
I've
the
seen it
film.
on stage as well.
it is on the
It's a
stage because
ballet.
it's a huge ballet like they always do,
Run of the
and
mill.
it becomes a nightmare. And then somewhere suddenly comes from an opera singer in the pit who sang
Somewhere.
it. And then I'm ignoring that. But in the film, they just went straight into them singing. Of course, Richard Baymer was horrific, and he was dubbed as well, not very well, I didn't think.
Have you heard the
That's my two-penny worth.
recording with Koti Kappa and...
Well,
actually,
now that's
I've
interesting.
got that on vinyl somewhere. I found it at a charity shop again.
I remember, and it won an award, didn't it? But that was Bernstein thinking that it was his sort of Beethoven ninth and all that, and it was all a bit embarrassing. And of course,
I enjoy
all the
listening-
wrong voices.
No, all the wrong voices. I mean,
And they couldn't do the rhythm. As soon as you got musical theatre people in singing, people like Riff and all that, it sounded brilliant because they can do it.
They were
But
wrong
when you
for
get
it.
Jose Carreras, poor thing, he couldn't get the rhythm of Something's Coming, and that was
it's also
absolutely
weird to have
cringeworthy.
him singing an American character when he couldn't do an American accent. It's
No,
really weird,
and
weird
couldn't do the
thing.
rhythm.
And then they did a series of them, didn't they? They did South Pacific, and then
They did.
I've not heard that.
they did South Pacific, and they
And
also-
Candide.
The Candide, although that's a lot of musical theatre singers in that.
Actually,
Oh.
that's the wrong Candide because I went, here we go, there's me going to this and going to that and going to the other. But,
When did you go to the other?
well, so to speak.
The other palace.
I went to the Barbican because Rosie Ash, soprano Rosie Ash, a mate, had to take over from an American opera singer. God, I'll remember her name in a minute. And this was a concert performance of Candide. He had who were the two people who Adolph Green and Betty Condon were doing all the narration.
Oh.
And the soprano got flu. It was the year of the terrible flu, and Bernstein got it, and shortly after that he died.
Oh gosh.
Yeah, it was extraordinary. But
Sorry, did we kill Bernstein?
we killed Bernstein.
You don't want to be the soprano that killed Bernstein. Let's just put it that way.
But what a great name for a film.
Yes,
The Killer Soprano.
the soprano who killed Bernstein. But why were we talking about Bernstein? Oh, yes, because they then recorded it. Jerry Hadley was in it as well, who's a wonderful singer.
Yes, that's right. Yes, I had
But
the recording
again,
in a
what was
box.
so interesting was Bernstein took it terribly slowly because that often happens with composers. They fall in love with every note.
No,
so
we don't.
It's so. Are you a composer?
Decomposing.
I was about to say it's worth listening to the vinyl of Bernstein conducting West Side Story because it's really interesting how
Yes.
different it is compared to the originals.
But is it enjoyable?
I enjoy it, but
It's
not for the
enjoyable
singing.
With the variant? Yeah.
But when you hear the original with Carol Lawrence and Larry Kurt, there's a freshness to it and this wonderful feeling of it's not entirely accurate all the time, but it's got some sort of visceral excitement, hasn't it?
Do you think that's why you didn't like the film? Because it was pristine and perfect?
I don't think.
It wasn't that perfect, but it was certainly over-beefed. The orchestrations were over-beefed. Again, I absolutely loved it.
Is it possible, therefore, to argue, bearing in mind the context of when West Side Story was originally produced on the stage in the mid-50s,
Yeah.
we had 15 years of the Rodgers and Hammerstein style musical. I'm not
Yeah.
going to criticise it, but
Yeah.
what it did do, as we know, is slow down the musicals of the 20s and 30s. So suddenly
Yeah,
everything
yeah.
became much more ponderous and slow, and tempos went right down. And then all the other great surviving composers did exactly the same thing. You've got Kiss Me Kate,
Yes.
and various other people producing those kind of slower
Yeah.
shows, and then suddenly you get West Side Story where the tempo's all up again.
Yeah.
Is that possible? You've talked about energy, you've been talking quite dynamically about it, and also the dynamism of the piece. Is it possible to argue, therefore, that actually the groundbreaking element of it is the rediscovery of tempo? Or is that simplistic?
I don't know. I would say it's very much... Because it's gang-led, it's got to have that
Power.
and energy,
Tribal,
hasn't it?
almost.
You were.
Instead
Tribal, almost.
Yes, and try 10. No.
Tribal tone.
the complete opposite of 30 women talking about eating lobsters.
It's also worth noting that the version of America that we are accustomed to came out of the film, and that lyrically and musically, the version from the stage show, at least initially, was not as potent. The message of the song wasn't as clear.
It was just women, wasn't it? It was just the girls singing.
Exactly. Didn't have the back and forth, and the demarcated lines of one side versus the other weren't as strong, so it wasn't as much of a fun song. And what's interesting about film adaptations, and I think this exemplifies that, is it gives the creative team a chance to take a second pass at the property. And sometimes this means yanking songs or making other changes, like in the Chicago film, or doing really unfortunate things, as in Sweeney Todd. But in this case, I think it was a nice refinement of the prior material. And
of course, did they not move, because I Feel Pretty was I Feel Pretty and witty and gay, and I pity any girl who wasn't me today, and they had to change it to tonight for the film because it was in a different position.
Yeah.
Right.
Witty and bright.
I also think...
yes, that's completely different.
I also think that swapping Cool and Officer Crookley
was
so
much better because Cool suddenly...
It became quite sinister in a way. I don't know.
Because Cool wasn't in the original. I remember it was just a sort of... just saying, calm down. But this happened because it happened after the actual murders.
Yeah.
That's right. And Officer Krupke, you needed to break up something very heavy that had happened beforehand, and I can't think
Which
what
might
it
work
was.
better on stage, but I felt Cool with that.
But they all felt that. Stephen Sondheim, and I think the whole creative, they did think that worked much better.
Did Officer Krupke ever have the rude word at the end?
Yes. Do you know? No, it didn't. I think that was just a little bit too far for even theatre audiences.
We're talking Krupp and its variants, are we?
Yes. Crap.
But
That
they
would
did
really
say,
obvious.
do you remember when the Jets slogan, or their sort of word was sperm to worm, and in the film they do birth to earth, because they can't use the word sperm. I mean, it is extraordinary, and this was as late as 1962.
It'd be interesting to see what the remake is like.
Well, it'll be presumably back to that.
But also, since the original and now, we've had versions where songs were done entirely in Spanish.
Yeah.
Which is an interesting choice.
That was Arthur Lawrence's decision, wasn't it? Before he died, he did a version of it where the Puerto Ricans...
That's right.
And it was Lin-Manuel Miranda that provided some of the Spanish lyrics?
Yeah.
And it didn't succeed.
No.
Because it's incredibly difficult for any audience to be bilingual. I mean, some will be, but not enough to
and
bring
you'd
in
have
the money.
to put
Some
titles up.
yeah.
But also, I find also interesting is that things like the mambo, which is iconic, isn't it, choreographically,
In the nightclub. In the disco.
in Dance at the Gym.
Yeah. School disco, surely.
Because I was talking to someone who played who played Baby John over here, the youngest one of the Jets, called Lindsay Dolan, and he then became a very successful choreographer in his own. But I spoke to him when I was working on a show that he was involved with. He was choreographing, and he said, actually, he didn't actually choreograph Mambo. That was left to his assistant.
Oh.
And one of the other dances, it isn't actually Jerome Robbins, although he took it. Isn't that interesting? Oh. And that is absolutely iconic. I mean, it's the most extraordinary choreography.
You heard it here first. I want to thank you, Jonathan, for that. I want to shift the mood a bit and discuss Mamma Mia 2.
Down then.
Here we go again.
Can I just say something?
I don't think everyone here has seen it.
Who
I
has
did a
seen it?
conversation about being groundbreaking.
Have you seen it?
I
haven't even seen the first
I threw
one.
myself violently backwards.
So if there's going to be a spoilery discussion, I'll recuse myself.
It's not going to be a spoiler discussion.
What time are we booked into the restaurant, by the way?
We have 13 minutes, so I think we can discuss Mamma Mia 2's intelligence in that time.
Oh, I think that was...
Do I detect editorial, Nick?
I think so. Well,
I enjoyed
apart
it.
from... Can I just say, because my eyesight's so crap at the moment, sorry, so bad, as
So
we're talking about
Krupke, I think you'll
censorship,
find.
so Krupke and Birth to Earth, it was finding it very hard to see, even on an enormous screen, the characters. So I got completely confused, and I wasn't sure who the young guys were.
Or girls.
Well, it's not shifting back in time.
I know, but I knew it was shifting back in time, but I couldn't realise who was doing what to you. Anyway, What I felt was as soon as you got Meryl Streep, and of course most people thought, oh, she'll be in the whole thing, and of course she isn't, she comes in the last 10 minutes. This was an extraordinary thing, was that this writ large, what a terrific actress Meryl Streep is. Suddenly everybody else looked mediocre, uncharismatic. She comes on, and of course her characters, it's layer after layer after layer. It's amazing. And you think, oh, that's what it lacked. That's my feeling.
Oh, that's interesting. Wow.
And what's her name? Siegfried?
Amanda Seyfried.
Oh,
Siegfried and Roy.
I'm sorry, I didn't like her on the first one. This is just me. But I couldn't bear her. And her voice is this thin voice, and it's got a horrible vibrato that's a bit like a steamroller right at the ends of notes. Like that, you think, no, sorry, it won't do. And of course, the actual backing, the actual orchestration sounds fab.
But I don't want to be rude, and in fairness to her, you know, it's also got Pierce Brosnan in it and things like that. I remember when the first film came out, everyone was saying, well, the interesting thing is that people are doing the genuine singing, but that therefore means you actually don't get top-notch record. It's been this argument, isn't it, in the profession for years on films. Should you dub? Should you do the Martin Nixon? Or should you allow the actors to sing their own
it was all right with Pierce Brosnan because he knew he couldn't sing, we knew he couldn't sing. It was quite fun.
He
was all right, he hit the notes.
But
with Amanda Seyfried,
better in this one than it was in the original.
He was, but he only has about 4 lines to sing.
Well, that's why.
But having said that, when she's singing, I just thought pitch bend, pitch bend, pitch bend all the way through.
Isn't that a musical
By
aerobic?
Amanda thing.
I thought Lily James did a very good job.
I like.
Well, I got her muddled. I thought she was Amanda. I thought they were the same person. I got very confused, as you might be, but you probably won't because you're bright. I thought the young guys were absolutely boring as anything.
I liked the young characters.
Only
I
because
liked
you
young
fancied
Harry.
them.
No, did not. How dare you? I liked young Harry. I liked the Waterloo scene in the restaurant. That was really inventive.
That does not travel well if you've not seen it.
Well, except that I just didn't think his voice was very good. And the backing, you know, all the orchestration is all going absolutely mental.
I thought he got away with it because he was charismatic.
Did you? And also, did you really think the dialogue was that great? You know, it was forced laughs, and I thought they're trying to make it feel like a feel-good musical, like the first one genuinely was.
To be honest, I didn't look too much into it because it's Mamma Mia 2, and who gives a crap? It's just a fun film.
But it wasn't as fun as it should have been. That's what I felt.
Diminishing returns in a sequel, Jonathan.
They were really. I think this one was more about. It was more.
It's not Chekhov, is it?
No, there's a more somber tone in this
cash in
than there was in the original film, and I don't think it was quite as feel good in this one, but it's more poignant.
But I love her. What's her name? Is it Baranski?
Christy Baranski.
She's fab.
So is Julie Walters.
How is Cher?
Yes. Cher's great.
Is she?
Really? I thought
think
Cher was like you couldn't. She's had so much plastic surgery. You can't even tell her.
But it's camply fun. You just think. But I've seen her being interviewed. Oh, she's completely like that.
Yeah, I know.
Sorry, camp chair.
Or just only slightly.
I'm
I
much more
switched off when
interested
she was
to
on
see it
screen.
than I was with.
Before we had the.
Showman. I can't say it without feeling.
Please say it.
Sick. Greatest Showman.
Well, I haven't seen that.
Oh,
have you seen that?
I haven't. I have seen La La Land, but not quite sure.
Did you like that?
La La Land.
Yeah.
Mixed feelings. The first 20 minutes I thought were compelling and made me want to be
other
to see
7
more of the
hours
story.
Can I just say I had mixed feelings from awful to
Worse.
Oh, really?
oh.
You see, I liked it, although I think it's been diminishing returns. It's one of those things I enjoyed in the moment and then didn't like afterwards.
It was hideous. It was pretentious. Also, who played the guy?
Ryan Gosling.
You know, and all this thing about he could play the piano. Yeah, he could play the piano a bit, but when it came to anything really jazzy and difficult, someone else was doing it and it cut away from him. And also, all that polemic about talking to us about jazz. Hello, we know this.
My favorite part of the movie was when he had gone on this rant about jazz being background music.
Oh.
And brings his girlfriend to the jazz club and talks over the entire act.
Yes, which you really wanted to hear what was going on, do you mean?
Yeah. Well, I mean, just it was direct contradiction to what he was
Oh, yes, that's
advocating.
right. You talked over
Was
it.
it my favourite bit?
Like I'm
When all
talking
these
over you.
words went in front of
Yes,
the
that's
face.
my favourite bit as well.
Oh, at the end. Oh, I see.
Also-
how rude.
I know.
Also, the fact that they couldn't dance properly, and people say to me, they're not meant to, and I thought, yes, but this is a film. You don't really want to see people glamping around. The only time they were really good was when they were in the planetarium and the old thing. And then someone told me it was somebody else. They had real
Marnie
dancers.
Oh, that's interesting.
The equivalent
that's
of
my
Marnie
problem with the
Nixon.
film, because it's meant to invoke like the films from the
It didn't.
the 30s and 40s, and if you're going to try and do that, then the music has to be as good,
Yeah.
if not better, and it wasn't.
Yeah.
It was
And
mediocre.
didn't you also think...
And the dancing, the performances.
Yeah, didn't you also think the music was pretty pretentious as well? I didn't think it was very good. And also...
What's wrong with City of Stars?
Oh, God. And the first number, you couldn't hear a word they were singing anyway on the
motorway. But
on the
that
motorway.
wasn't the point of that first number, was it? That was
What was the point again?
I think to surprise you. Surprise me.
It did surprise me about how boring, and it went on. Actually, no, it was all right. It wasn't bad. No, I must be quite nice about that bit, I think.
I remember being somewhere halfway through the movie and realizing that I forgot it was supposed to be a musical.
Yeah,
Yes, I think the
that's
makers
main
felt
problem.
that
Yes.
as well.
I just didn't care about
You didn't care about anybody. And who
Yeah,
was
the
it?
characters were
I
so
just-
unlikable.
So it actually has got to the point now, and this is terribly
They
unfair,
are
especially as an
unlikable.
actor, but I really do not want to see any film that Ryan Gosling or Emma Stone are in.
But my friend Liz, who I had lunch with today, she saw it and thought he was absolutely terrible. She said she's seen him in other things when he's really good.
Okay.
But didn't he do
He is good in lots of other
didn't the
things.
director do a very good film about a drummer beforehand?
Yes, that was very good.
it
Called
Whiplash?
Whiplash. Did you see that?
I didn't.
I thought it was brilliant. Did you not like it?
I haven't seen it.
I mean, it was brutal, but it was good. And I thought, oh, this will be interesting. Who called it Blah Blah Land?
Everyone.
Everybody.
No, but somebody actually
it
put
was
on
me,
a
a
post.
friend of mine called it blah blah blah.
That's right. And I thought he's so right. But you had a little row with somebody on...
Oh, I had a row because I have many friends who adore it.
Yeah, and then I thought, I can't
said,
meet
it's
these
my
friends.
story.
And I-
It's about me and my artistic struggle. And I was like, oh, for God's sake.
And my problem with
Tonya was either slitting her wrists or playing a mini violin.
I was
there. It's hard to
slitting my
tell.
wrist. My problem with
Very
the whole-
negative.
My problem
But I'm
with
good
the-
at that.
My problem with the whole start. This is the thing. I had a massive argument with someone about The Greatest Showman.
Which I haven't seen, as I keep saying.
Okay. It's the similar thing with La La Land. It's just I feel like this is really cynical, but I feel like the music is forcing me to feel a certain way. Like it's
I
really
agree.
uplifting.
Have you never seen a Disney film?
Oh no,
Yes.
but that's yes, but
That's
but you
different.
sort of, if you listen to Snow White, it's got the most
Yes.
incredible background. All the incidental music is wonderful. It's sort of Wagner. It's
I'll accept that, but what about the last 20
Pixar.
years worth of Disney films?
pretty nasty, some of it, I have to say. But
But
it's
you have the same. Dom has the same feeling about Pixar nowadays. Is that
But hang on,
force you
hang
to
on.
Feel things.
hang on, it's for children anyway, so it's a
It's not
slight.
for children. It's for everyone.
I'm talking about Disney though. Like
Yeah,
classic
I'm talking
Disney.
about that, but La La Land isn't. But La La Land was pretending to be grown up.
It's what it is. It's taking. It's this belief that the message is more important than the story, and La La Land and The Greatest Showman. My problem with the two of them were it was all surface emotion. It was basically
Yeah.
saying you must feel
Yeah.
sad,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
this is terrible,
Yeah.
and so it kind of is drawing his.
It's actually
How is
cynical.
that-
It's Hollywood at its worst. That's what
Yeah.
Hollywood sometimes could do.
But I think that's a
at its
trend
worst.
now with a lot of films. So what were you
Well, I
saying?
was going to make the very same point. How is that? Why is the bile being poured onto this film, particularly when that is just representative of where
Because people
popular
are
culture
lazy.
currently
Because
is?
I think
Love it.
Honestly, genuinely, people are lazy and they want to go and they want to just sit there and be told how to feel instead of genuinely feeling.
Yes, but then
emotions.
old Hollywood films often did that. But you came up feeling great. You went, oh God, I feel much better.
But
for
I
that."
don't think it's not the same because I think they disguised it somewhat. I think with things like this, I feel it's hollow emotion, and I
Yeah.
don't think
I
it's
agree.
just those films. And I'm not pouring. There was
Tea.
oh yes.
There are other things to do.
The Birdman was hugely. Everybody
But
said
people
it was
have said the
wonderful,
same thing,
and I
hated
thought
it
was-
as well.
And I thought it was empty.
But can I just mention, isn't this rather indicative of the age we're living in?
Yes.
That it's sort of following what people seem to want these days, which is pouring out your emotions and saying, oh God, I had such a terrible time and this, that, the other, and
Now, I wonder whether if you go back to the Depression, when
Yeah.
Busby Berkeley
Jonathan
I was
was
just
and
there.
musicals
about
of
to say
that, because they were to do a release. So
I'm not that
have they
old.
become, I mean, this is a
Well, I see
rhetorical
what you're
question.
trying to say.
Has Greatest Showman and La La Land, were they such a success because there was a feeling of angst going on?
But I'm
And
not
there's an element
sure.
of escapism
But do you
within
really
the
think
films.
do you really think that La La Land I thought it was depressing from the beginning to the end. I didn't feel any hope in it.
It was a
at
very,
all.
very contemporary story put in the clothes of a classic musical, but the actual the narrative of these characters doesn't really match the sensibility of a musical at all. It's a very naturalistic, depressing story.
You're right.
And the reason that the couple doesn't work out, spoiler alert, is not because they had some tragedy or they missed an appointment in the Empire State Building. It was just they were kind of whatever, and they drifted away. And we never even saw that happen on screen. We just cut to 10 years later or whatever.
I think that's why we don't care about those characters particularly.
Well, they were personally unlikable as well.
They weren't nice
characters. You liked it, didn't you? And
no, I must say, I just want to say
Did
on the
you see
record.
it in the cinema? Or
I saw it in the cinema.
And were you drunk, or were you...
I just want. We've got to. This conversation can't go on much longer, so there's probably not much point in mining it too much further. But we need to be careful not to be too sneery about what we have just said, which is actually this is a film that delivered to people what they wanted.
Well,
I don't think that is
because I think people.
I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing.
People were promised a retro film of the old glory day of Hollywood, and I don't think it delivered that at all.
But yes, but you're never going to be able to get a film from the old days, are you?
We've always said that My Crazy Ex-Girlfriend has a better sequence than anything in La La Land.
It's not My Crazy
What do you mean we have always said
Actually,
this?
I think Michael's got a point there, because you really want the people in the film to suddenly go into something else, and they don't. They're still being
like a morgue.
dreary
it's like a watered down
doing...
musical. It's watered down. It's for people that. So they market it as a musical, and they promise that it's going to be this spectacular musical thing. And it's but I think they kind of watered it down because the people that want to go see a musical might take someone with them who don't want to see a musical, or they don't want to sit for a musical, and it's kind of something for some people.
But I felt it was pretentious from very
Instead
many.
Of being brave and actually being a musical.
Whiplash
talk.
Sorry.
No, I just want to say, however, look, once again, we need to be careful how we judge consistently here. You know, if we're talking about it being miserable and people walking off and not very nice characters, I would direct you to West Side Story. If you're talking about pretentious, I would direct you to Candide. You know, these are held up to be great masterpieces. I'm not saying this is a masterpiece, but I have to say that I don't think it's doing.
There are people who
do. But you cared about the people in West Side Story, and in Candide you don't. But Candide's a flawed piece anyway, isn't it?
I don't think you have to care about a character to enjoy. I mean,
I think you do.
No,
who do you like in Into the Woods?
That's very interesting.
That's why that's a bad show.
We might have to. We might
it's a great show,
we have to end this conversation.
Yes, we
now
do.
Before one of us gets killed. But
No, nobody's getting that.
It's been an absolute joy.
absolutely
We
not.
might continue it later for the future. But
Might we?
No,
let's
I think we've done
really-
enough. But although it's very interesting, we continue.
I think
in
we've torn the
private.
arse out of it.
let us know what you think with your thoughts, listeners. And thank you very much, Jonathan, for letting us record in your lovely jardin. And we will have you on again within the next 10 years.
For more information about Musical Talk, please visit our website at musicaltalk.co.uk. You can email us at feedback@musicaltalk.co.uk, listen to past episodes on iTunes and YouTube, and follow our social media channels on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.